The rope burned against Delilah Zimmer's wrists as her brother Thomas shoved her toward the waiting wagon, and she knew with sickening certainty that her life would never be the same. The autumn wind of 1882 cut through her threadbare dress as she stumbled forward, her eyes burning with tears she refused to shed in front of the three men who stood near the back of that covered wagon, their faces shadowed by their hat brims in the fading Montana daylight. "Get in," Thomas muttered, his voice rough with whiskey and shame. At 24, her brother had aged badly in the past year, his face gaunt and his eyes hollow from the gambling debts that had consumed him. Delilah was 21, old enough to understand exactly what was happening, but powerless to stop it. Their parents had died 2 winters ago, leaving Thomas as her guardian, and he had squandered everything they owned on cards and drink. "Thomas, please," she whispered, hating the tremor in her voice. "There has to be another way." He would not meet her eyes. "I owe them $500. You are the only thing of value I have left." One of the men stepped forward, a thick-set brute with a scar running down his cheek. "Enough talking. We got a long ride ahead, and Mr. Blackwell don't like to be kept waiting." Delilah felt her blood turn to ice at the name. Everyone in Miles City, Montana, knew about Silas Blackwell, the man who ran the gambling halls and the girls who worked in them. She had heard the stories whispered by other women at the general store, tales of girls who disappeared into his establishments and were never seen again by their families. "I will not go," she said, planting her feet even though her whole body trembled. "You cannot sell me like livestock, Thomas. Our mother would be ashamed of you." Thomas flinched as if she had struck him, but still he would not look at her. "I am sorry, Delilah. I truly am. But they will kill me if I do not pay." The scarred man grabbed her arm roughly, and Delilah cried out. She struggled against his grip, but he was far stronger than her. The other two men moved to help, and within moments they had lifted her bodily into the wagon despite her kicks and protests. One of them tied her ankles together while another secured her wrists to an iron ring bolted to the wagon bed. "You are a coward, Thomas Zimmer," she shouted as they prepared to leave. "A coward and a traitor to your own blood." Her brother finally looked at her then, and she saw tears streaming down his face. But he did nothing to stop them as the driver cracked the reins and the wagon lurched forward, carrying her away from the only home she had ever known. The wagon rolled through the dusty streets of Miles City as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Delilah's mind raced frantically, searching for any possible escape, but the ropes held firm and the men showed no signs of mercy. They headed east out of town, following the Yellowstone River as darkness fell. She lost track of time as they traveled, the wagon bouncing over the rough terrain until her whole body ached. The men spoke little, passing a bottle of whiskey between them and laughing occasionally at jokes she could not hear. Delilah closed her eyes and tried to pray, but the words would not come. How could God allow this to happen? They had been traveling for perhaps 2 hours when the wagon suddenly jerked to a halt. Delilah opened her eyes to see the scarred man standing up, his hand moving to the gun at his hip. "What is it?" one of the others asked nervously. "Someone on the road ahead," the scarred man replied. "Just one rider." Delilah's heart leaped with desperate hope, though she knew that one man would likely be no match for 3 armed thugs. Still, any chance was better than the fate that awaited her with Silas Blackwell. "State your business," the scarred man called out into the darkness. "This here is private property we are transporting." A voice came back from the shadows, low and steady. "Funny thing about that, I do not recall anyone owning the public road." The voice sent an unexpected shiver through Delilah, though she could not say why. There was something calm and measured about it, as if the speaker had seen worse than 3 armed men and had not been particularly impressed. "Move along, stranger," the driver growled. "This does not concern you." "Well now, I am afraid I cannot do that." The rider moved forward into the dim light cast by the wagon's lantern, and Delilah got her first look at him. He was tall and lean, sitting easy in his saddle atop a magnificent roan horse. His face was shadowed by his hat, but she could make out a strong jaw and steady eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore a long duster coat that hung open, revealing a gun belt with a well-worn Colt revolver. Something about the way he carried himself suggested he knew exactly how to use it. "The lady in your wagon appears to be there against her will," the stranger said calmly. "That concerns me quite a bit." The scarred man laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "This here is legitimate business. Her brother sold her to clear his debts. All legal-like." "Is that so?" The stranger's voice dropped a few degrees colder. "Because last I checked, selling human beings became illegal back in 1865. Maybe you fellows missed that particular bit of news." "Listen here, you son of a—" The scarred man reached for his gun, but he never cleared leather. The stranger moved with startling speed, his revolver appearing in his hand as if by magic. The sharp crack of gunfire split the night, and the scarred man howled, clutching his bleeding hand. "Anyone else want to try their luck?" the stranger asked mildly, though his gun never wavered as he covered all three men. The other two raised their hands slowly, their faces pale in the lamplight. The driver's voice shook as he spoke. "Mister, do you have any idea who you are crossing? Silas Blackwell owns half of Miles City. He will hunt you down for this." "Let him try." The stranger dismounted smoothly, keeping his weapon trained on the men. "Now, I am going to give you boys a choice. You can ride back to Miles City and tell Mr. Blackwell that his merchandise got damaged in transit, or you can stay here and become permanent residents of the Montana Territory. I will let you decide which appeals to you more." "He will kill us if we come back empty-handed," one of the men protested. The stranger shrugged. "Not my problem, but between possibly getting killed later and definitely getting killed right now seems like an easy choice to me." The men looked at each other, then at the stranger's unwavering gun, and came to a rapid consensus. The scarred man wrapped his bleeding hand in a handkerchief, and all three of them scrambled onto their horses and took off at a gallop back toward Miles City, leaving the wagon and Delilah behind. The stranger holstered his weapon and moved to the back of the wagon, his boots crunching on the gravel road. "Are you hurt, miss?" Delilah found her voice at last. "Only my pride, sir." "Thank you. Thank you so much." He pulled out a knife and cut through her bonds with quick, efficient movements. "Can you stand?" She nodded, though her legs shook badly as he helped her down from the wagon. Now that she was closer, she could see him more clearly in the lamplight. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was weathered from time in the sun, with the kind of quiet strength that came from hard work and harder choices. There was a scar along his jawline, thin and white against his tanned skin. "My name is Colton Garrett," he said, tipping his hat to her. "I apologize for not intervening sooner. I wanted to be certain of the situation before I acted." "I am Delilah Zimmer," she replied, her voice steadier now. "And you have nothing to apologize for. You saved my life tonight, Mr. Garrett." "Just Colton, please." He studied her face in the dim light, and she found herself unable to look away from those steady gray eyes. "Your brother sold you?" The shame washed over her anew, and she wrapped her arms around herself. "He owed gambling debts to Silas Blackwell. $500. I am not sure if that makes it better or worse." "It makes it worse," Colton said flatly, "because it means he valued his own worthless hide over his sister's life and dignity." The blunt assessment should have hurt, but instead, Delilah felt a strange sense of relief. Someone else saw the truth of what Thomas had done, saw it clearly and without excuses. "What will you do now?" she asked. "Those men will go back to Blackwell. He will send more people after you. After both of us." Colton was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Do you have anywhere else to go? Family in another town?" She shook her head miserably. "My parents are dead. Thomas was all I had left." Then I suggest we make your brother pay his debts the honest way. There was something hard and determined in Colton's voice that made Delilah look up sharply. What do you mean? I mean that we are going back to Miles City, and your brother is going to face what he has done. And then we are going to have a conversation with Mr. Silas Blackwell about the price of human beings. You cannot, Delilah protested. Blackwell has dozens of men working for him. You would be killed. Colton smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Miss Zimmer, I have been in tighter spots than this, and lived to tell about it. Besides, there is a principle at stake here. You are not merchandise to be bought and sold, and men like your brother and Silas Blackwell need to learn that lesson. But why? Delilah asked, bewildered by this stranger's determination. Why risk yourself for someone you do not even know? He met her eyes again, and this time she saw something deep and painful there, some old wound that had never fully healed. Because once upon a time, someone I cared about needed help, and nobody came. I will not let that happen to anyone else if I can prevent it. The simple honesty of his words touched something in Delilah's heart. She had spent the past hours feeling utterly alone and abandoned, convinced that no one in the world cared what happened to her. And now here was this stranger, this cowboy with his steady eyes and quiet strength, willing to risk everything to set things right. Thank you, she whispered. I do not know what else to say. You do not need to say anything. Colton moved back to his horse and swung into the saddle, then offered her his hand. We should get moving. Can you ride? Not well, she admitted, but I will manage. He helped her up behind him, and Delilah had to put her arms around his waist to keep from sliding off. She could feel the solid warmth of him through his shirt, the steady rhythm of his breathing. It had been so long since anyone had touched her with kindness that she nearly started crying again. Hold on tight, Colton said, and urged his horse into a smooth canter back toward Miles City. They rode through the night, the vast Montana sky spread out above them like a blanket of stars. Delilah had grown up in this territory, but she had never really appreciated its wild beauty until now, perhaps because she had never truly felt free to enjoy it. Her whole life had been circumscribed by duty and worry, first caring for her ailing parents, and then trying to manage her increasingly erratic brother. Can I ask you something? She said after a while, her voice barely audible over the sound of hoofbeats. Go ahead. Where are you from? You do not sound like most of the men around Miles City. I was born in Texas, Colton replied. Spent some time in Kansas and Colorado before drifting up this way. My father had a ranch before the war, but things fell apart after that. I have been working as a ranch hand mostly, going wherever the work takes me. Do you have family? A sister in San Antonio, last I heard. We are not close. There was a finality in his tone that suggested he did not want to discuss it further, so Delilah let the subject drop. They reached the outskirts of Miles City just as dawn was breaking, painting the wooden buildings in shades of pink and gold. The town was starting to wake up, smoke rising from chimneys as people began their morning routines. Colton guided his horse through the quiet streets until they reached a small house on the edge of town, hardly more than a shack really, with peeling paint and a sagging porch. That is where Thomas lives, Delilah said quietly, recognizing the place that had been her home for the past 2 years. But he may not be there. He often stays out all night drinking. Then we will wait for him. Colton dismounted and helped her down. Are you sure you want to face him? I can handle this alone if you prefer. Delilah thought about it, then shook her head. No, I need to see this through. I need him to look me in the eye and acknowledge what he tried to do. Colton nodded approvingly. All right then, let us see if your brother is home. They approached the door, and Colton knocked firmly. There was no answer at first, but after the third knock, they heard stumbling footsteps inside. The door swung open to reveal Thomas, his eyes bloodshot and his clothes rumpled. He stared at Delilah as if seeing a ghost. How did you... He started, then his gaze shifted to Colton, and his face went pale. Who are you? I am the man who stopped your sister from being sold into slavery, Colton said coldly. And now we are going to have a discussion about how you plan to pay your debts like a man instead of a coward. Thomas tried to close the door, but Colton put his boot in the way. I do not think so. You are going to listen to what I have to say, and then you are going to make this right. There is no making this right, Thomas said bitterly. I owe Blackwell $500. I do not have $500. I do not have $5. They are going to kill me. Then you better start thinking of ways to earn it. Colton pushed into the house, and Delilah followed. The interior was even worse than she remembered, reeking of stale alcohol and unwashed clothes. Empty bottles littered every surface. Thomas sank into a chair, his head in his hands. You do not understand. Blackwell does not give extensions. He does not negotiate. I had no choice. You had a choice, Delilah said, and her voice was hard as stone. You chose to gamble away everything our parents left us. You chose to keep gambling even when you had nothing left to lose. And then you chose to sell your own sister rather than face the consequences of your actions. I am sorry, Thomas mumbled. I am so sorry, Delilah. I was desperate. I did not know what else to do. You could have asked for help, she replied. You could have gone to the church or to one of the other ranchers. You could have signed on as a ranch hand to work off the debt. But instead, you took the easiest way out, the way that cost you nothing but cost me everything. Tears were streaming down Thomas's face now, but Delilah felt no sympathy for him. She had wept too many tears over her brother's failures already. Colton had been quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke up. Here is what is going to happen. You are going to find work, any work, and you are going to start paying back what you owe. I know the foreman at the Rockingham Ranch outside of town. They are always looking for hands, and the work is hard enough that it will keep you too tired to gamble. You will sign over half your wages to Blackwell until the debt is paid. That will take years, Thomas protested weakly. Then it takes years. You made this mess, and you are going to clean it up. Colton's voice allowed no room for argument. And in the meantime, I am going to have a conversation with Blackwell to make sure he understands that Delilah is not part of this bargain. She is under my protection now. Your protection? Thomas looked between them suspiciously. What does that mean? It means exactly what it sounds like, Colton replied. Your sister needs a place to stay and a way to support herself that does not involve being sold like cattle. I have a solution for that. Delilah looked at him in surprise. They had not discussed this. What kind of solution? I work at the Three Rivers Ranch about 10 miles north of town, Colton explained. The owner, Mr. Hutchins, is a good man. His wife passed away last year, and he has been struggling to manage the house and care for his 2 young sons while running the ranch. He mentioned a few weeks ago that he was thinking of hiring a housekeeper. The position would include room and board plus wages. I do not know anything about housekeeping, Delilah admitted. I mean, I can cook and clean, but I have never worked for anyone before. You would be learning on the job, same as everyone else, Colton said. But I think you would do well. Mr. Hutchins is a fair employer, and his sons are good boys. It would be honest work, and it would give you independence from your brother. The offer was so unexpected and so generous that Delilah found herself blinking back tears for an entirely different reason. Why would you do this for me? You barely know me. Because it is the right thing to do, Colton said simply. And because I meant what I said earlier. Nobody should be at the mercy of people like Silas Blackwell. Thomas spoke up then, his voice hoarse. What about me? If you take Delilah away, Blackwell will take out his anger on me. He will kill me for sure. Then you better make sure you are valuable to him alive, Colton replied, without sympathy. You will start working, and you will start making payments. As long as you are making good on the debt, he has no reason to kill you. And if he tries anything, he will have to answer to me. Who are you? Thomas asked again, staring at Colton with a mixture of fear and confusion. Why would Blackwell care what you think? Colton smiled grimly. Let me worry about that. You just focus on keeping your word for once in your miserable life. He turned to Delilah. Get whatever belongings you want to keep. We will head out to the Three Rivers once we have finished our business with Blackwell. Delilah nodded and moved through the small house, gathering the few possessions that mattered to her. A photograph of her parents, her mother's wedding ring, a few changes of clothes. It all fit easily into a single carpet bag. She paused in the doorway of what had been her room, looking back at the narrow bed and bare walls. She had been so miserable here, trapped in this house with Thomas's drinking and gambling, watching helplessly as everything fell apart around them. She would not miss it. When she returned to the main room, Colton was writing something on a piece of paper. He handed it to Thomas. This is the name of the foreman at the Rocking M. You will report there this afternoon, sober and ready to work. He will be expecting you. How did you? Thomas started. I have my ways. Now do we have an understanding? Thomas looked at the paper, then at Delilah, and finally nodded slowly. Yes, I will do it. I will work off the debt. See that you do. Colton picked up Delilah's bag and moved toward the door. Come on, Miss Zimmer. We have one more stop to make before we leave town. Delilah followed him out, taking what she hoped would be her last look at the house that had been her prison. Thomas remained inside, slumped in his chair, and she felt nothing for him but a hollow sadness for what he had become. They walked through the streets of Miles City as the town came fully to life around them. Merchants were opening their shops, and the smell of fresh bread drifted from the bakery. Under other circumstances, Delilah might have found it pleasant, but knowing what lay ahead made her stomach clench with nervousness. Are you truly going to confront Silas Blackwell? She asked Colton quietly. I am. You could be killed. Everyone says he is dangerous. Colton glanced at her, and there was something almost amused in his expression. Miss Zimmer, I have been shot at by Comanche raiders, chased by angry ranchers, and once spent 3 days trapped in a canyon with a wounded horse and no water. Silas Blackwell does not frighten me. But still, I appreciate your concern, he said, and his voice softened slightly. But this needs to be done. Men like Blackwell operate on fear and intimidation. If nobody ever stands up to them, they just get worse. Sometimes you have to draw a line and defend it no matter the cost. They reached the Silver Palace, the largest gambling hall in Miles City and Silas Blackwell's headquarters. It was a 2-story building with a fancy painted sign and large windows that showed the gaming tables inside. Even at this early hour, there were a few dedicated gamblers hunched over their cards. Colton pushed through the swinging doors, and Delilah followed nervously. The interior smelled of cigar smoke and whiskey, and the floor was covered in sawdust. A few men looked up as they entered, their eyes widening at the sight of Delilah. No respectable woman would be caught dead in a place like this. A man in a fancy vest approached them, his expression concerned. Miss, I am not sure you should be here. This is not really a place for ladies. We are here to see Silas Blackwell, Colton said firmly. Tell him it is about Thomas Zimmer's debt. The man's expression changed immediately, becoming wary. Wait here. He disappeared through a door at the back of the room, and Delilah moved closer to Colton. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone in the room could hear it. It will be all right, Colton murmured. Just stay behind me and let me do the talking. The man returned a moment later. Mr. Blackwell will see you. Follow me. They were led through the door and up a narrow staircase to the second floor. The man knocked on a heavy wooden door, and a voice from inside called out, Come in. Silas Blackwell's office was surprisingly refined, with expensive furniture and paintings on the walls. The man himself sat behind a large desk, a cigar in one hand, and a ledger open in front of him. He was perhaps 50 years old, with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He looked more like a banker than a criminal, but Delilah could see the coldness in his eyes. Well, well, Blackwell said, looking at Delilah with interest. I have to say, I did not expect to see you again, Miss Zimmer. My men told me there was some trouble on the road last night. I assume you are the cause of that trouble, sir? Colton Garrett, Colton replied, not offering his hand. And yes, I am the one who sent your men running back with their tails between their legs. Blackwell's expression hardened. That was a very foolish thing to do, Mr. Garrett. I do not appreciate people interfering with my business transactions. And I do not appreciate people buying and selling human beings as if this was still 1859. Colton shot back. Miss Zimmer is not property, and she is not part of her brother's debt. Whatever Thomas Zimmer owes you, he will work it off honestly, but his sister is out of the picture entirely. Is that so? Blackwell leaned back in his chair, studying Colton with calculating eyes. And who exactly are you to be making these declarations? You are just a drifting cowboy, Mr. Garrett. I own half this town. If I wanted you dead, you would be in the ground by sunset. You could try, Colton said calmly. But before you do, you might want to know that I have already sent telegrams to the territorial marshal and to a friend of mine who writes for the newspaper in Helena. They know all about your little business arrangement with Thomas Zimmer. They know you were planning to force his sister into prostitution to cover his gambling debts. And they are very interested in investigating your other business practices as well. It was a bluff, Delilah realized, with a mixture of terror and admiration. They had come straight here from confronting Thomas. There had been no time to send any telegrams, but Blackwell did not know that, and the uncertainty showed in his eyes. You are playing a dangerous game, Blackwell said slowly. No more dangerous than the one you play every day, Colton replied. Here's my offer, Blackwell. You accept Thomas Zimmer's wages as payment for his debt. It will take him a few years to pay it all back, but you will get every penny. And in return, you leave Delilah alone. She has nothing to do with this anymore. You also do not retaliate against me for interfering. We all walk away and go about our business. And if I refuse, then those telegrams I mentioned become very real, very quickly. The territorial marshal has been looking for a reason to investigate you for quite some time. I imagine he would be very interested to learn about your habit of accepting people as payment for debts. That sort of thing tends to make territorial authorities nervous, especially when they are trying to convince Washington that Montana is ready for statehood. Delilah held her breath as Blackwell considered this. She could see him weighing his options, calculating risks and benefits. Finally, he stubbed out his cigar in a heavy glass ashtray and nodded slowly. Very well, Mr. Garrett. You have made your point. Thomas Zimmer can work off his debt, and I will consider his sister to be outside of our arrangement. But let me be very clear about something. If Zimmer fails to make his payments, or if I find out you were bluffing about those telegrams, our agreement is void. Do we understand each other? Perfectly. Colton tipped his hat. Pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Blackwell. They turned to leave, but Blackwell spoke again. One more thing, Mr. Garrett. You have made an enemy today. I do not forget people who cost me money. You might want to watch your back. I always do, Colton replied, without turning around. Funny thing about threats, Mr. Blackwell. They only work on people who scare easily. They walked out of the Silver Palace and into the bright morning sunlight. Delilah's legs were shaking so badly she could hardly walk. As soon as they were out of sight of the building, she grabbed Colton's arm. You were bluffing about the telegrams, she said. You could have gotten us both killed. But I did not, Colton pointed out. Blackwell is a businessman, and businessmen respond to threats to their business. He will leave you alone now because it is not worth the risk of attracting attention from the territorial authorities. And what if he decides to have you killed anyway? Then I suppose I will have to be faster than whoever he sends. Colton smiled at her, and despite everything, Delilah found herself smiling back. There was something exhilarating about what they had just done, about standing up to the man who had seemed so powerful and untouchable just hours ago. Come on, Colton said, leading her back toward where his horse was tethered. Let us get out of Miles City and head to the Three Rivers. I think you have had enough excitement for one day. They rode north out of town, following a well-worn trail that led into rolling grasslands dotted with cattle. The morning sun warmed Delilah's back, and she found herself relaxing for the first time in months, maybe even years. Being with Colton made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since her parents were alive. "Can I ask you something?" she said after a while. "Sure." Back in Blackwell's office, when you were facing him down, you did not seem afraid at all. How did you stay so calm? Colton was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "I was afraid," he said finally. "I am not stupid, but fear is not always a bad thing. It keeps you sharp, keeps you focused. The trick is not letting it control you. My father used to say that courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite the fear. Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was." There was a note of sadness in Colton's voice. "He died at Shiloh in 1862. I was just a boy, but I remember him telling me that standing up for what is right is always worth the risk. I try to honor that." "I am sorry you lost him," Delilah said softly. "Thank you. It was a long time ago, but it still hurts sometimes." He glanced back at her. "What about your parents? What were they like?" Delilah felt the familiar ache of grief, though it was duller now than it had been 2 years ago. "My mother was strong and practical. She could stretch a dollar further than anyone I ever knew, and she never complained, even when times were hard. My father was gentler, a dreamer. He used to tell me stories about traveling to California and seeing the ocean. He never made it, but he always believed that good things were just around the corner." "It sounds like they loved you very much." "They did." Delilah's throat tightened. "I miss them every day. If they could see what Thomas has become, it would break their hearts." "Maybe," Colton said, "but they would be proud of you. You did not break last night, even when you had every reason to. That takes strength." His words warmed something deep inside her, and Delilah found herself fighting back tears again. She had been so focused on surviving, on just getting through each day, that she had not stopped to think about whether she was being strong or weak. She had simply done what she had to do. They rode in comfortable silence for a while longer, and Delilah took the opportunity to study the man who had so unexpectedly become her rescuer. There was something about Colton that was different from other men she had known. He was confident, without being arrogant, strong without being cruel. And when he looked at her, really looked at her, she felt as if he truly saw her as a person, not just as someone's sister or someone's potential property. It was a startling realization to discover that she was attracted to him. Under the circumstances, it seemed almost inappropriate to be noticing the breadth of his shoulders or the way his hands moved with such easy competence as he controlled his horse. But she could not help it. Colton Garrett had ridden into her life like something out of one of her father's stories, and she found herself wanting to know everything about him. The Three Rivers Ranch came into view just before noon, a sprawling collection of buildings nestled in a valley where three small streams converged. The main house was a solid log structure with a wide porch, and there were several barns and outbuildings scattered around it. Cattle grazed in the distance, and Delilah could see several men working near one of the corrals. "That is home," Colton said, and there was genuine affection in his voice. "I have been working here for about 6 months now. It is good land, and Mr. Hutchins treats his people fairly." They rode up to the main house, and a man emerged onto the porch. He was perhaps 45, with sun-weathered skin and kind blue eyes. He smiled when he saw Colton, then looked curiously at Delilah. "Colton, good to see you back," the man said. "I was starting to worry when you did not return last night." "Sorry about that, Mr. Hutchins. I ran into a situation in town that required my attention." Colton dismounted and helped Delilah down. "This is Miss Delilah Zimmer. Delilah, this is Mr. James Hutchins, the owner of the Three Rivers." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Zimmer," Hutchins said, tipping his hat. His eyes were friendly but questioning. "Miss Zimmer needs a place to stay and work," Colton explained. "I know you have been thinking about hiring a housekeeper. If you are still interested, I believe she would be perfect for the position." Hutchins looked between them, clearly sensing that there was more to the story. "Why do not you both come inside? I just made a fresh pot of coffee, and you can fill me in on the details." They followed him into the house, which was spacious and well built, but showing signs of neglect. Dust covered many of the surfaces, and dishes were piled in the kitchen. It was clear that Hutchins had been struggling to maintain the home on his own while managing the ranch. Over coffee, Colton explained what had happened, giving Hutchins a condensed but honest version of the events. Delilah watched the rancher's face as he listened, and she saw his expression shift from surprise to anger to sympathy. "That is a terrible thing your brother did," Hutchins said when Colton finished. "I am sorry you had to go through that, Miss Zimmer." "Thank you," Delilah replied. "And please call me Delilah. I am grateful that Colton intervened when he did." "As am I." Hutchins looked at her thoughtfully. "I will be honest with you, Delilah. This house has been falling apart since my wife passed. I have 2 boys, 8 and 10 years old, and they need a woman's care. I need someone who can cook and clean and help manage the household. It is not easy work, and the pay is not extravagant, but you would have your own room and all your meals provided. Does that sound like something you would be interested in?" "Yes," Delilah said immediately. "Very much so. I promise I will work hard, Mr. Hutchins." "I believe you will." He smiled at her. "When can you start?" "Right now, if you would like." "Then let me show you to your room, and you can get settled in." Hutchins stood and motioned for her to follow. "Boys, come out here and meet our new housekeeper." 2 children appeared from a back room, both with their father's blue eyes and sandy hair. The older one looked at Delilah with cautious interest, while the younger one hid shyly behind his brother. "This is Matthew," Hutchins said, indicating the older boy. "And this is Samuel. Boys, this is Miss Delilah. She is going to be helping us take care of the house." "Hello, Matthew." "Hello, Samuel," Delilah said warmly. "I am very pleased to meet you both." Matthew nodded seriously, but Samuel just peeked out from behind his brother without speaking. "Samuel is a bit shy around new people," Hutchins explained, "but he will warm up to you soon enough. Boys, why do not you show Miss Delilah to the spare room while I finish talking to Colton?" The boys led her down a hallway to a small but pleasant room with a window that looked out over the valley. It had a bed, a dresser, and a washstand, and it was more space than she had had in Thomas's house. "Thank you, Matthew," she said. "This is perfect." The boy hesitated at the door. "Are you going to stay for a long time?" "The last lady Papa hired only stayed 2 weeks before she left." "I am going to stay as long as your father will have me," Delilah promised. "I do not have anywhere else to go, and I very much want to help your family." This seemed to satisfy Matthew, and he and Samuel left her to settle in. Delilah sank onto the bed, suddenly exhausted. So much had happened in the past 24 hours that it hardly seemed real. Yesterday morning, she had woken up in Thomas's house, miserable and trapped. Tonight, she would go to sleep in a safe place, with honest work ahead of her and the memory of a gray-eyed cowboy who had risked everything to save her. She thought about Colton and felt her cheeks warm. It was foolish to develop feelings for him so quickly, she told herself. He had simply done the right thing, nothing more. He probably helped people all the time. It did not mean anything. But even as she thought it, she knew it was not true. There had been something in the way Colton looked at her, a connection that went beyond simple charity. And the way her heart raced when he was near was not something she could dismiss or ignore. She unpacked her few belongings and then returned to the main room, where Colton was preparing to leave. "I need to get back to work," he was telling Hutchins, "but I will check in this evening to make sure everything is settled." "We will be fine," Hutchins assured him. "Thank you for bringing Delilah to us, Colton. I think this is going to work out well for everyone." Colton nodded, then turned to Delilah. For a moment, they just looked at each other, and the air between them seemed charged with unspoken words. "Thank you," she said finally. For everything. I will never forget what you did for me. You do not need to thank me, Colton replied softly. I am just glad I was in the right place at the right time. You take care of yourself, Delilah Zimmer. You too, Colton Garrett. He left, and Delilah watched through the window as he rode away toward the distant cattle herds. She felt the loss of his presence like a physical ache, which was ridiculous considering she had only known him for a few hours. He is a good man, Hutchins said from behind her, making her jump. One of the best hands I have ever had. Honest, hard-working, does not drink or gamble, and he is good with the horses. He certainly seems capable, Delilah said, trying to keep her voice neutral. Hutchins chuckled. He is also single, in case you were wondering. Not that it is any of my business, of course. Delilah felt her face flame. I was not wondering about that. I mean, it does not matter. I just met him. Of course, Hutchins said, but its tone suggested he did not believe her for a second. Well, shall we discuss your duties? I warn you, the house is in a bit of a state. My wife, Helen, she kept everything running so smoothly that I did not realize how much work it was. Since she passed, I have been scrambling just to keep the boys fed and in clean clothes. They spent the rest of the afternoon going over what would be expected of her, cooking 3 meals a day for the family and the ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse, keeping the main house clean and organized, doing laundry and mending, looking after Matthew and Samuel when their father was working. It was a lot of responsibility, but Delilah found herself looking forward to it. For the first time in years, she would have a purpose beyond just surviving. She would be contributing something meaningful, earning her own way in the world. That evening, she prepared her first meal at the Three Rivers. It was nothing fancy, just beef stew and biscuits, but Hutchins and the boys ate with genuine appreciation. The ranch hands, a group of 5 weathered cowboys who took their meals in the bunkhouse, were equally complimentary. Colton arrived just as she was cleaning up after dinner. He had cleaned up some himself, washing off the day's dust, and Delilah caught herself staring at him before she remembered to look away. How was your first day? He asked, leaning against the doorframe of the kitchen. Good. Busy but good. She dried a plate and set it on the shelf. Mr. Hutchins and the boys have been very kind. I am glad to hear it. Colton paused, then said, I wanted to make sure you were settling in all right, and to tell you that I sent a wire to the territorial marshal today. Not a bluff this time, but a real one, just to be safe. Delilah's hands stilled in the dishwater. What did you tell him? The truth, that Silas Blackwell attempted to purchase a woman to work in his establishments, and that I intervened. I also mentioned that he has been accepting people as collateral for gambling debts. The marshal is opening an investigation. Won't that make Blackwell angry? Probably, but it also means he will be too busy covering his tracks to worry about us. The territorial authorities do not take kindly to that sort of thing, especially not this close to statehood. Blackwell will have to be very careful about his business practices from now on. You thought of everything, Delilah said, looking at him with admiration. I try. Colton smiled. Listen, Delilah, there is something I wanted to ask you. On Sunday afternoons, I usually ride out to check the eastern fence line. It is pretty country out there, and it is not too strenuous a ride. Would you like to come with me? If Mr. Hutchins can spare you, I mean. Her heart leaped at the invitation, but she tried to keep her voice steady. I would like that very much. Good. It is a date, then? He tipped his hat to her. Good night, Delilah. Good night, Colton. She watched him leave, her hands still in the dishwater, and realized she was smiling like a fool. A date. He had called it a date. Maybe she was not the only one feeling this strange, sudden connection. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Delilah threw herself into her work, determined to prove her worth to Mr. Hutchins and his sons. She woke before dawn each day to start breakfast, spent the mornings cleaning and organizing the house, and devoted the afternoons to cooking and looking after the boys. Matthew and Samuel gradually warmed to her. Matthew was serious and responsible, clearly trying to be the man of the house in his own way. Samuel was quieter and more sensitive, but he had a sweet smile that reminded Delilah of her own father. She found herself growing fond of both boys, and they seemed to respond to her genuine affection. She saw Colton each evening when he came in from his work, and they fell into an easy pattern of conversation. He would tell her about his day on the ranch, and she would share stories about the boys or funny mishaps in the kitchen. It was comfortable and natural, and Delilah found herself looking forward to those moments more than anything else. Sunday arrived clear and bright, perfect weather for a ride. Delilah put on her best dress, which was not saying much considering her limited wardrobe, and met Colton at the stables. He had saddled a gentle mare for her, a pretty chestnut with a white blaze on her forehead. "Her name is Bess," Colton said as he helped Delilah mount. "She is the calmest horse we have, perfect for someone who is not used to riding." They set out at an easy pace, heading east across the grasslands. The day was warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers. Delilah felt free in a way she never had before, as if some heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "This is beautiful," she said, looking around at the vast expanse of land and sky. "I have lived in Montana my whole life, but I feel like I am seeing it for the first time." "I know what you mean," Colton replied. "Sometimes it takes a change in circumstances to make you appreciate what you have." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, following the fence line as it wound through the rolling hills. Eventually, they stopped beside a small creek, and Colton helped Delilah dismount. They sat on a flat rock beside the water, and he pulled out a canteen and some sandwiches he had brought along. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, offering her one. "Thank you." Delilah took a bite and realized she was ravenous. "You think of everything." "I try to be prepared." Colton took a drink from the canteen, then passed it to her. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "What do you want, Delilah? I mean, now that you are free of your brother and safe at the Three Rivers, what do you want for your future?" It was a question she had been asking herself for days. "I am not sure," she admitted. "For so long, I was just trying to survive, trying to keep Thomas from drinking himself to death or gambling away the last of our money. I never really thought about what I wanted for myself." "Think about it now," Colton encouraged. "If you could have anything, what would it be?" Delilah looked out at the creek, watching the water flow over the smooth stones. "I think I would want a home," she said slowly. "A real home, with people who care about me. I would want to feel safe and valued, and I would want to do work that matters, work that helps people." She paused, then added softly, "And I would want someone to love who loves me back. Is that too much to ask?" "No," Colton said quietly. "I do not think that is too much to ask at all." She turned to look at him and found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What about you? What do you want?" Colton was quiet for a long moment. "I have been drifting for a long time," he said finally. "Ever since my father died and our ranch fell apart, I have worked a dozen different places, met 100 different people, but I never stayed long enough to put down roots. I told myself I liked the freedom, the ability to move on whenever I wanted. But lately, I have been thinking that maybe I was just afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid of caring too much, afraid of building something only to lose it again." He picked up a pebble and tossed it into the creek. "But then I met you, Delilah, and something changed. For the first time in years, I found myself thinking about staying in one place, about building something lasting." Delilah's heart was racing now. "Colton, what are you saying?" He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes serious. "I am saying that I cannot stop thinking about you. I know we have only known each other a few days, and I know the circumstances of how we met were less than ideal. But there is something between us, Delilah. I feel it, and I think you feel it too." "I do," she whispered. "I have been trying not to, because it seems so sudden, but I cannot help it." Colton reached out and took her hand, his rough fingers gentle against her skin. "I do not believe in rushing things. I want to do this right, to court you properly, and give you time to be sure. But I also do not want to pretend I do not care about you, because I do, very much. Delilah felt tears prickling at her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sadness. I care about you too, Colton. More than I should, probably, considering how recently we met, but I cannot deny it. Then let us see where this goes, Colton said softly. No promises yet, no rushing. Just two people getting to know each other and seeing if maybe, just maybe, we have found something worth keeping. I would like that, Delilah said, and then Colton was leaning toward her, and she was leaning toward him, and their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, Delilah was breathless. Colton smiled at her, that rare, full smile that transformed his whole face, and she smiled back. We should probably head back, he said reluctantly, before Mr. Hutchins sends out a search party. Probably, Delilah agreed, though she would have been happy to stay there by the creek forever. They rode back to the ranch as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Delilah felt as if she were floating, her whole body humming with happiness. Just a week ago, her life had been a nightmare. Now, impossibly, it felt like a dream. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Delilah worked hard at her duties, earning the respect and affection of everyone at the Three Rivers. The house was soon cleaner and more organized than it had been in over a year, and her cooking improved with practice. Matthew and Samuel had fully accepted her, and she grew to love them as if they were her own younger brothers. And then there was Colton. They spent every free moment together, talking and laughing and getting to know each other. He told her about growing up in Texas, about his father's dreams for the ranch and how the war had destroyed everything. She told him about her childhood, about the happy years before her parents got sick and the difficult years after. They went on rides together on Sunday afternoons, exploring the land around the Three Rivers. Colton showed her secret places he had discovered, hidden valleys and streams where wildflowers grew in profusion. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from philosophy to favorite foods. And they kissed, sweet stolen moments when no one was watching. Each kiss deepened the connection between them, building something strong and real. One evening in late October, about 6 weeks after they had first met, Colton asked her to walk with him after dinner. They strolled away from the house, following a path that led up a small hill overlooking the ranch. I have been thinking, Colton said as they stood looking out at the lights of the main house and bunkhouse below, about my future, about what I want. And what do you want? Delilah asked, though her heart already knew the answer. I want to stop drifting. I want to put down roots. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Mr. Hutchins offered me a partnership in the ranch, a small stake to start with, but with the possibility of buying in more as I save up. It would mean I could stay here permanently, maybe even build a house of my own someday. That sounds wonderful, Colton. I am so happy for you. The thing is, he continued, his voice soft and serious, I do not want that house to be just for me. I want to share it with someone, with you, if you would have me. Delilah's breath caught. Colton, are you asking? I am asking you to marry me, he said. I know it has not been long, but I am more sure of this than I have been of anything in my life. I love you, Delilah Zimmer. I love your strength and your kindness and your determination. I love the way you laugh and the way you care for Matthew and Samuel. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you just how much. Yes, Delilah said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, Colton, I will marry you. I love you too, so very much. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, and Delilah felt as if her heart might burst from happiness. This man, this wonderful, strong, kind man, loved her, wanted to spend his life with her. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for. When? She asked when they finally broke apart. When do you want to get married? As soon as possible, Colton replied with a grin. But I want to do it right. I want to give you a proper wedding, with a nice dress and flowers, and everyone we care about there to celebrate with us. Does Christmas sound good? That gives us 2 months to prepare. Christmas sounds perfect, Delilah said. Absolutely perfect. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Mr. Hutchins took one look at their glowing faces and smiled knowingly. So I take it congratulations are in order? He said. We are getting married, Colton announced. Christmas Day, if that is all right with you. It is more than all right, Hutchins said warmly. It is wonderful news. Helen would have loved this. She always said this ranch needed more happiness. Matthew and Samuel were thrilled when they heard. Samuel, who had grown much less shy around Delilah, hugged her tightly and asked if this meant she would be staying forever. Forever and ever, she promised him, ruffling his hair. The news spread quickly through the ranch and the surrounding community. Delilah wrote a brief letter to Thomas, informing him of her engagement. She did not expect a response, and she did not receive one. She had heard through the grapevine that he was still working at the Rocking M and staying sober, which was more than she had dared hope for. She wished him well, but she no longer felt responsible for his choices. He would have to find his own path. The territorial marshal's investigation into Silas Blackwell had borne fruit as well. Blackwell had been charged with several counts of fraud and illegal coercion. He would not be going to prison, probably. Men like him rarely did, but his power in Miles City was significantly diminished. He sold the Silver Palace and moved to Helena, and good riddance as far as Delilah was concerned. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a happy blur. Delilah worked with the women from the nearby ranches to sew a wedding dress, a simple but beautiful creation in ivory satin. Colton and the other ranch hands built furniture for the small house that Mr. Hutchins had given them as a wedding present, a cozy cabin about a quarter-mile from the main house. On Christmas morning, Delilah woke before dawn, too excited and nervous to sleep. She dressed carefully in her new gown, and one of the neighboring wives helped her arrange her hair. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the frightened, desperate girl who had been tied up in a wagon just 3 months ago. That girl was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her own strength and worth. The ceremony took place in the main room of the ranch house, with the local minister officiating. There were perhaps 30 people there, ranch hands and neighbors who had become friends. Matthew and Samuel stood as Colton's best men, both of them scrubbed clean and wearing their Sunday best. But Delilah only had eyes for Colton as she walked toward him. He looked impossibly handsome in a new suit, his dark hair neatly combed and his gray eyes shining with love as he watched her approach. The minister spoke the traditional words, and they exchanged vows and simple gold rings that Colton had purchased in Miles City. And then the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Colton kissed her as everyone cheered. The celebration that followed was joyous and raucous. There was music and dancing, and Mr. Hutchins had arranged for enough food to feed an army. Delilah danced with Colton, with Matthew and Samuel, and even with some of the old ranch hands who blushed like boys when they asked her. As the sun set and the celebration finally wound down, Colton swept Delilah into his arms and carried her out of the house toward their new home. Everyone hooted and called out congratulations as they left. The cabin was small but perfect, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, a bedroom, and even a small loft that could be used for storage or someday for children. Colton set Delilah down gently just inside the door. "Welcome home, Mrs. Garrett," he said softly. "Mrs. Garrett," she repeated, savoring the sound of it. "I like that very much." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Delilah wrapped her arms around his neck. They made their way to the bedroom, shedding clothes and inhibitions, learning each other's bodies with patience and tenderness. Colton was gentle with her, mindful of her inexperience, and Delilah gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Delilah's head pillowed on Colton's chest as she listened to the steady beat of his heart. "Are you happy?" he murmured, stroking her hair. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," she replied honestly. "Sometimes I cannot believe this is real, that I am here with you." "It is real," Colton assured her, "and it is only going to get better. We are going to build a good life together, Delilah. I promise you that." "I believe you," she whispered, and she did. The winter passed in a haze of contentment. Delilah continued her work at the main house during the day, though she spent her evenings and nights with Colton in their cabin. They fell into an easy domestic routine, cooking meals together and sitting by the fire in the evenings while Colton read aloud from whatever books they could get their hands on. Spring brought new life to the ranch. Calves were born, and the work intensified as the hands prepared for the spring roundup. Colton was busier than ever, working long hours to prove himself worthy of Mr. Hutchins's partnership offer. In April, Delilah realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be certain, then went to see the doctor in Miles City. He confirmed what she had already suspected. She was expecting a child. She told Colton that evening, catching him as he came in from checking the cattle. "I have some news," she said, unable to keep the smile from her face. "Good news, I hope," he replied, hanging up his hat. "The best news. We are going to have a baby, Colton. Sometime in December, the doctor thinks." For a moment, Colton just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a huge grin split his face, and he picked her up and spun her around, laughing. "A baby! Delilah, that is wonderful!" He set her down and immediately looked concerned. "Are you all right? Should you be working so hard? Maybe you should rest more." "I am fine," she assured him, laughing at his sudden anxiety. "The doctor said I am healthy and strong, and there is no reason I cannot continue my normal activities for quite some time yet. Still, we should be careful. I do not want anything to happen to you or the baby." His protectiveness touched her deeply. "We will be careful, but Colton, we are going to be parents. Can you believe it?" "Barely," he admitted. "But I am so happy I could shout it from the rooftops." They told Mr. Hutchins and the boys that evening, and the ranch erupted in celebration. Samuel asked if the baby would be able to play with him, and Matthew wanted to know if it would be a boy or a girl. "We will have to wait and see," Delilah told them. "But either way, he or she will be very lucky to have such wonderful big cousins." The months of Delilah's pregnancy passed peacefully. She continued her work as long as she was able, though Mr. Hutchins insisted on hiring a girl from town to help with the heavier chores as Delilah's belly grew. Colton was attentive and loving, constantly worrying about her comfort and health. In early December, just a few days before their first anniversary, Delilah went into labor. The local midwife was summoned, and Colton paced anxiously outside the bedroom while Delilah worked to bring their child into the world. It was a long labor, lasting through the night and into the next day. But finally, just as the sun reached its zenith, a baby's cry filled the cabin. The midwife emerged with a smile. "You have a son, Mr. Garrett, a healthy boy with a good, strong set of lungs." Colton rushed into the bedroom to find Delilah propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, with a tiny bundle in her arms. She looked up at him with tears of joy streaming down her face. "Meet your son," she said softly. Colton approached carefully, as if afraid he might break something. He looked down at the tiny red face of his newborn son and felt his heart expand in a way he had never experienced before. "He is perfect," Colton whispered. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Delilah asked. They had discussed names for months, but now that the baby was actually here, it seemed like such an important decision. Colton thought for a moment, then said, "What about James after Mr. Hutchins, and William for a middle name after my father?" "James William Garrett," Delilah said, testing the name. "I like it. Jamie for short." "Jamie," Colton repeated, reaching out to touch his son's tiny hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength. "Hello, Jamie. Welcome to the world." The next few months were exhausting but wonderful. Jamie was a good baby, healthy and strong, though he demanded attention at all hours of the day and night. Delilah found herself operating on minimal sleep, but she had never been happier. Watching Colton with their son melted her heart over and over again. He was such a natural father, patient and gentle and completely devoted. As Jamie grew, his personality began to emerge. He had Colton's gray eyes and Delilah's dark hair, and a smile that could light up a room. Matthew and Samuel doted on him, competing to see who could make the baby laugh. Life at the Three Rivers continued its peaceful rhythm. Colton's partnership in the ranch was formalized, and he took on more responsibility in managing the operations. Delilah gradually returned to her duties at the main house, though on a more limited basis now that she had Jamie to care for. One evening in the spring, when Jamie was about 5 months old, Delilah sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sunset. Colton emerged from the house with their son in his arms, and he settled onto the porch swing beside her. "I have been thinking," he said as Jamie grabbed at his father's collar, "about how far we have come in the past 2 years." "It does seem impossible sometimes," Delilah agreed. "I keep thinking about that night on the road when you stopped that wagon. If you had not been there, if you had not intervened." She shuddered at the thought of what her life would have become. "But I was there," Colton said firmly, "and everything that has happened since then has been worth whatever risks I took that night. You and Jamie are my whole world, Delilah. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." She leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body and listening to the happy gurgling of their son. "I love you, Colton Garrett. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for giving me this life." "I love you too," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "And you saved me just as much as I saved you. I was lost before I met you, just drifting through life without any real purpose. You gave me something to fight for, something to build. You gave me a home." They sat there as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the Montana sky in brilliant colors. Jamie fell asleep in Colton's arms, his tiny fist clutching his father's shirt. And Delilah thought about how strange and wonderful life could be, how the worst night of her life had led directly to the best days she had ever known. 2 years later, Delilah gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Clara Helen Garrett, after Delilah's mother and Mr. Hutchins's late wife. She had her mother's features, but her father's steady disposition, a calm baby who seemed to observe everything with wise eyes. Jamie, now a rambunctious toddler, was initially unsure about having a sister, but Colton patiently explained that being a big brother was an important job, and Jamie took to his new role with enthusiasm. He would bring Clara his favorite toys and tell her long, rambling stories that made no sense but seemed to delight the baby. As the years passed, the Garrett family flourished. Colton's stake in the Three Rivers Ranch grew as he saved money and proved his worth to Mr. Hutchins. Eventually, they expanded their cabin into a proper house with enough room for their growing family and the possibility of more children in the future. Matthew and Samuel grew into fine young men. Matthew went off to college in Helena to study law, determined to make something of himself. Samuel stayed on at the ranch, having discovered a talent for working with horses. He and Colton became close friends as well as colleagues. Delilah heard occasional news of Thomas through the community grapevine. He had eventually paid off his debt to Silas Blackwell and had stayed on at the Rockingham Ranch. He married a widow from town and seemed to have finally found some stability. Delilah felt no bitterness toward him anymore, only a distant sort of sadness for the brother he might have been. She had sent him a brief note when Jamie was born, and he had sent back a short letter of congratulations and apology. They would never be close, but at least the wound had scabbed over. One summer evening when Jamie was 7 and Clara was 5, the family gathered on the porch of their house to watch the sunset. Another child was on the way, due in the fall, and Delilah's hand rested on her swelling belly as she sat in the rocking chair Colton had made for her. Jamie was telling Clara an elaborate story about cowboys and outlaws, acting out all the parts with dramatic flair. Clara watched her brother with rapt attention, occasionally asking questions that sent the story spinning in new directions. Colton sat on the porch steps, whittling a small wooden horse for Clara's birthday. He looked up at Delilah and smiled, and the love in his eyes made her heart skip a beat, even after all these years. "Are you happy?" he asked her, the same question he had asked on their wedding night. "So happy I can barely contain it," she replied honestly. "Sometimes I think I must be the luckiest woman in Montana, maybe in the whole world." "I am the lucky one," Colton said. "I was just drifting before I met you, going through the motions of living without really being alive. You changed everything, Delilah. You gave me purpose and joy and a reason to build something lasting. We gave those things to each other," she corrected gently. "We saved each other, Colton, and we built this life together." He set down his whittling and came to sit beside her, taking her hand in his. "Do you ever think about that night when I found you in that wagon?" "Sometimes," Delilah admitted, "but not with fear anymore. When I think about it now, I think about how that was the night my real life began, the night I met you." "Mama, Papa, look," Jamie called out, pointing to the sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. "Can you see the Big Dipper?" "I see it," Clara said excitedly. "It looks like a big spoon." Colton and Delilah laughed, and Colton pulled Jamie onto his lap while Delilah gathered Clara close. They sat there together as a family, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast Montana sky. In the years that followed, the Garrett family continued to grow and thrive. The third child was another son, named Daniel, after Delilah's father. He had a mischievous streak that kept everyone on their toes, but a kind heart that endeared him to everyone he met. Colton eventually became a full partner in the Three Rivers Ranch when Mr. Hutchins began to ease into retirement. The ranch prospered under their joint management, becoming known throughout Montana for the quality of their cattle and horses. Delilah never returned to her work as housekeeper, focusing instead on raising their children and managing their household. But she found other ways to contribute to the community, organizing charity drives for families in need and serving as a midwife's assistant when called upon. She never forgot what it felt like to be helpless and trapped, and she made it her mission to help others who found themselves in similar situations. Jamie grew into a strong, capable young man with his father's quiet confidence and his mother's compassionate heart. He eventually took over the day-to-day management of the ranch, allowing Colton to slow down as he aged. Clara became a teacher, opening a small schoolhouse on the ranch property, where she taught not only the Garrett children, but also the children of the ranch hands and neighboring families. She had inherited her mother's determination and her father's steady nature, and her students adored her. Daniel followed his own path, developing a talent for working with wood. He became a skilled carpenter and furniture maker, his pieces sought after throughout the territory. As Colton and Delilah grew older, they spent more time simply enjoying each other's company. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching their grandchildren play in the yard, marveling at how their family had grown. "Did you ever imagine this?" Delilah asked Colton one evening as they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. "When you stopped that wagon all those years ago, did you have any idea where it would lead?" Colton thought about it, his weathered face creasing in a smile. "I knew there was something special about you from the moment I saw you. I did not know it would be this exactly, but I knew I wanted to find out." "I am glad you did," Delilah said softly. "I am glad you were brave enough to intervene, even when you did not know me at all." "How could I not?" Colton replied. "You needed help, and I was there. It was as simple as that. Though I will admit I did not expect to fall in love with you. That was an unexpected bonus." Delilah laughed. "An unexpected bonus? Is that what I am?" "You know what I mean." Colton pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, exactly as she had done 1,000 times before. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "Delilah Garrett, the very best thing." They sat there in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they had worked so hard to build on. Around them, the sounds of their family filled the air. Jamie's voice calling to his own children, Clara's laughter drifting from the schoolhouse where she was preparing the next day's lessons, Daniel's hammer rhythmically working in his shop. It was a good life, a life built on love and hard work and second chances. Delilah thought about the frightened girl she had been 30 years ago, convinced that her life was over before it had really begun. That girl could never have imagined the happiness that lay ahead of her, the family and home and love that would fill her days. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge, Colton helped Delilah to her feet. They walked hand in hand back to their house, their steps slow but steady. Inside, the fire was burning low in the hearth, casting warm shadows on the walls. "Thank you," Delilah said as they prepared for bed. "For everything, Colton. For saving me. For loving me. For building this beautiful life with me." "Thank you," Colton replied, pulling her into his arms for a goodnight kiss. "For being brave enough to trust me. For making me believe in happy endings. For being my partner in every sense of the word." They climbed into bed, and Delilah snuggled close to her husband, listening to his steady breathing as he drifted off to sleep. She stayed awake a little longer, thinking about all the years that had passed and all the blessings they had received. Her brother had sold her to clear his debts, had treated her like property to be traded. But Colton had found her and had seen her worth when no one else did. He had made Thomas pay for his actions, not with violence, but with accountability. And most importantly, he had loved her with a fierce devotion that had never wavered in all their years together. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, the hardships they had faced and overcome. She thought about their children and grandchildren, each one a testament to the power of love and second chances. She thought about the ranch that had become their home, the community that had embraced them, the life they had built together from nothing. It was more than she had ever dared to dream possible on that terrible night when Thomas had pushed her toward that wagon. But it was real, gloriously and perfectly real. As sleep finally claimed her, Delilah's last thought was one of profound gratitude. She was loved. She was safe. She was home. And somewhere out there, under the same Montana stars, other stories were unfolding. Other people were facing their darkest moments and their greatest challenges. But Delilah knew from experience that even in the darkest times, hope could survive. Love could triumph. And sometimes, when you least expected it, a gray-eyed cowboy could ride out of the night and change everything. The years continued to pass peacefully at the Three Rivers Ranch. Colton and Delilah lived to see their children marry and have children of their own, filling the ranch with the noise and chaos of a large, loving family. They spent their final years surrounded by the people they loved most, secure in the knowledge that they had built something lasting and good. When Colton passed away in his sleep at the age of 78, Delilah grieved deeply, but not bitterly. They had been given far more time together than many couples received, and she was grateful for every single day. She wore his wedding ring on a chain around her neck, close to her heart, and she told their grandchildren stories about the brave cowboy who had once stopped a wagon on a dark Montana road and changed the course of her life. Delilah lived for another 5 years after Colton's passing, cared for by her devoted children and grandchildren. On quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch of the house they had built together, watching the sun set over the land they had loved. And she would remember the gray-eyed young man who had looked at her and seen someone worth saving, someone worth loving. When her time finally came, Delilah slipped away peacefully in her sleep, dreaming of Colton's arms around her and his steady voice telling her that everything would be all right. Her children buried her beside her husband on a hill overlooking the ranch where they could watch over the land and the family they had created together for all eternity. Years later, their great-grandchildren would still tell the story of how Colton Garrett had saved Delilah Zimmer from a terrible fate and how their love had built a legacy that endured for generations. It became a family legend, a reminder that courage and compassion could change the world, one person at a time. And on quiet summer evenings, when the Montana wind whispered through the grass and the stars emerged one by one in the vast sky, some said you could still feel the presence of Colton and Delilah watching over the Three Rivers Ranch, their love enduring even beyond death. It was a beautiful story, a true story, and it reminded everyone who heard it that even in the darkest times, hope and love could triumph. The Three Rivers Ranch prospered for generations, passed down through the Garrett family line. Each new generation added their own chapters to the family story, but they never forgot the foundation that Colton and Delilah had built. The small cabin where they had started their married life was preserved and maintained, a shrine to the love that had given birth to everything that came after. And somewhere, beyond the veil of death, Colton and Delilah Garrett rested together, their hands clasped and their hearts forever entwined, the cowboy and the woman he had saved who had, in turn, saved him. Their story was complete, their journey finished, and the legacy they had created would endure as long as the Montana sky stretched wide and blue above the land they had loved.